After I made the geode and the coasters, I still wanted to mess with resin, but I needed, something to do. So I was messing around with one of those AI art programs because I was thinking about Atlantis stuff, and I came up with a set of images that we're going to use for our next project. And I had this base left because the base that I used for my resin geode came in a 2-pack. This is a little smaller, but this is what we decided to do with one of these pieces. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to do something like this, why don't I do one as a test piece and do one that will be a functional piece for my house? Because really I just wanted to use this up, this wood base, and get it out of the way. And just keep playing around, keep myself creative and busy. So I decided to make a secondary piece to help do another tutorial. And I will show you real quick where that piece is going to fill in and what's going to happen with that. Okay, this is how we're going to use up some scraps of random wood that I had around from previous doll housing projects and some projects with renovating around here at the house. You know what I mean? You all, well, not you, but a lot of us end up with, small random pieces of trim, leftover pieces of plywood. I did need to recently purchase a new piece of 1/4-inch craft plywood. It comes in 2-foot by 2-foot sections at Home Depot, and they'll make 3 cuts for you free. So, you can go in there and get several project pieces cut. And, the 2x2 piece of 1/4-inch is only about $6.50 or so. So that's a great studio investment if you're out of plywood, but you probably have a scrap sitting around of any size, or you can use a picture frame. The point for this one is that I wanted to use wood so that it will be sturdy and solid, and we'll be able to do lots and lots of processes to it, and they'll adhere. They'll, sink in and become part of the wood, and it'll just keep making it stronger. But that's all of that leads to this, okay? I did not bother mitering my corners or anything like that. I could have gone out and used the miter saw in the garage. But because every bit of this frame is going to get covered in a surface treatment, we won't see any of the joints or anything like that. So that way I could use up a bunch of scrap. And out of all the scrap, I, completely eliminated 2 whole pieces in there with 1/4 inch to throw in the garbage. And it was just enough to make a little frame, and that will fit on the back of my potty and give me a little bit more surface area to set my trinkets and things on, but be nice and stable. So we're beginning, and I just cut this. Look, it's so little, so thin. We're dealing with such small wood that I can cut it with a little hacksaw like this, just clamped to my table. Regular safety precautions, but I'm going to get it all glued together and primed and get everything else ready, and then we're going to go on a magical adventure together. So this is where we're at. That scrap wood turned into this little tray, and I've done all the boring stuff already off screen. I added another piece of trim to give us a deeper well to work with, and you can see it in there, but I've already done my priming, sanding, base coating off screen, so you didn't have to sit through all of that, because all it got was several coats of primer, 1 coat of cotton white, and then I've done a dark blue in the center, except for right here because the image is going there. I already started adding some of my texture. We're going to show that in just a second here, but I went ahead and I pre-drilled holes in each corner to give me some options. I'm going to make handles out of some interesting cotton yarns that I have. I'm going to make a kind of nautical looking rope and put some interesting beads on it that are leftovers from decorating my bathroom. And then this will work on the back of my potty to hold some trinkets and little things. So I've got it all prepped. And without further ado, let's get into some processes. We'll start by showing you how I did this, adding a little texture. And like I said, I know it looks very textural, uneven, and strange now, but by the time we're done, we're going to end up with something like this. And luckily we've got a little bit of sunlight to work with today, because look at the dimension in that. And we're going to use a couple of washes and then some super fun gilding waxes. Okay, so this first process, I've got it arranged, so I'm going to show how quick and easy it is, and then I'll show you the product and we'll talk about it. I use a palette knife, and I'm going to take this gel product that I'm using, and I have my stencil already placed down against the wood. Most of you know how to apply a stencil. With this stuff, you apply it with a palette knife and just kind of scrape it off. And in the case of this project, I actually want to be sloppy. When you go and you watch some people use this product, you'll see them do some really fine processes, sometimes very loose, sometimes nice and tight and really structured. But I'm going to get it on pretty quickly, pull my stencil right off, and drop it in water, because this stuff hardens, sticks to everything, and if you don't get it off of your tools right away, it will ruin them. So pause, and we're going to talk about it. Well, it was lucky I got that done very quickly, because I actually ripped my stencil. I should be able to get the last little section over here finished out of what's left of the stencil, but I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that one, so I'm not terribly upset about it. Okay, so what we're using is 3D Matte Gel by Art Alchemy Art Basics. And this is part of their Finnabair collection. I am going to put links in this tutorial description to the Finnabair channel on YouTube. That is how I discovered these products, and that was a couple of years ago, and I've been absolutely hooked on them. We're going to use a ton of them in this project. This one, the 3D Matte Gel, does things like this for you, where you can run it over a stencil and get some dimension, but it's also one of the best heavy-duty glues. So we're going to use it in places both to add dimension and to adhere our little things like shells and beads and whatnot to our tray, because this stuff sticks to anything. It'll stick to metal. If you don't get it off your palette knife and your stencil right away, it will stick, and it will stick there pretty permanently. You can scrape it off a palette knife, but you don't want to be messing with that. Better just to have a cup of soapy water for your tools. And I should have had a tray of soapy water for my stencil, but instead I just took it and, went to the sink and came back. So anyway, I love this line of products. I have no affiliation with them. I don't know them. I'm not sponsored, anything like that. I genuinely like these and use them. And we're going to use that one. We're going to use some of this texture paste. It just adds a crackle effect, but it's clear, so you can use it in multiple ways. I already applied a little bit in some of the corners and stuff like that, but when I go and do this other little part of stencil on the other side, I'll see if there's any places where it looks like I don't have enough dimension, and I'll just add a tiny bit of it. And we'll see how that turns out. And then as we paint, we might add some more areas with this into it. We're also going to use some more of those Art Alchemy Finnabair products because we love them. We're going to use some of their patina waxes and white wax. We'll be able to use the waxes anywhere on our frames. And they're pretty permanent, they're pretty durable. It's going to add a little bit of shine and those lovely metallics. Look at that in the sunlight. Now we've got some light and you can see the kind of like dimension and color and craziness we're creating. So we're going to use lots of those Finnabair products. I love, love, love them. And then this other, the gold I'm using is Dixie Belle. Dixie Belle is another one that I use a lot of. Their products, they make mostly mineral paints and waxes, and some of the stencils I have are also Dixie Belle. Really, really good stuff. Let's keep going. It seems we're going to have to delve a little bit more into some of the creative process of how I reuse and recycle junk into my art, and we're going to get a product review and some other cool stuff in this one. Okay, we're back at our lovely tray. We've added some texture with that 3D matte gel all the way around, except for places where I know I'm going to add some things later, some of the shells and pearls and little things like that. So I didn't want to blow extra money on this, really. That's the challenge, is don't go out and, you know, whatever. Let's go. So what I had originally printed from my little AI Atlantis project was a set of 8x10s and a couple of 4x4s because I knew that those would go into coasters, and I'm going to make myself a cute little set of coasters. So my opening on this tray is 14.5 centimeters. So I cut the image that I'm going to use for this to fit top and bottom, but I've got my fillet across, so I've got this extra space here. But this one I did, I went into one of the image editing programs and I took the same image, flipped it backwards, and then expanded it, made it bigger, and cut it back down to an 8x10 that I could also get printed at Walgreens. So I did spend an extra $4 to get another print of this one, because I want to replicate those buildings and fill some more of that space. And I was trying to think of how I could do that and do it with very, very thin layers. I'm going to have to be really careful. If you see there, I didn't measure what my depth is, but depth matters on your resin molds if you're doing layering effects. And especially if you're a beginner. I'm an amateur. And I do this for my mixed media pleasure. Resin is not like my main thing. So, staying on target, I decided that I would, you know, try to replicate the buildings on both sides so we have a longer avenue leading towards the pyramid. And I think it's going to work. But we have some gaps here and here at the sides. So what we're going to try to do, I made some little columns out of paper towel roll just to give me some height already to work with, and cut those to fit. And I'm going to try to replicate these columns here. I'm going to glue this down, and then I'm going to add just different stuff and build up until it's just about level with this, or maybe I'll just cut another piece of cardboard. And then every paint process that I do, I'm going to let it go ahead and hit this, but transition from whatever happens here on the edges to the color scheme that's in here. And it's a total experiment at this point, but it could turn out really cool. So hopefully you're seeing the vision here. And in pursuit of that little vision, I decided, wait, stay on target. Next thing in order. So, a while back, I picked up some of these little molds for my resin, and I also craft in like paper clay and plaster. These are fondant molds from the baking section. So when I see a neat looking one on clearance, sometimes I'll just pick it up and toss it into my resining and sculpting bag, whatever, bin. The only real difference between these and the ones that are made specifically for resin, like one of these little doohickeys, is that they have a slightly textured surface, so you don't get that super glassy surface. But for stuff like this, they're absolutely great because all of those pigments kind of need a top coat anyway. So they have their use. So, you know, like you build up a multi-purpose studio that way. So I cast some little things before that didn't work out for other projects, but I'll get to use some of them here. Because when I try a new process, you know, you never throw these bits away. I try to put them in little cups or bins by, you know, like relative subject matter. And this is one of those things. I had this in one of my little lighted displays, and it didn't work out. I tried to resin some lights into it, and the lights actually didn't hold up as well as the ones in the tutorial that I watched to do that did. So I threw it away, but she was kind of suspended above where the lights were glued into like the scene that I had. And I wanted to reuse her, so I was able to salvage her out of that old project that's now in the garbage. And we're going to try to use her somewhere because there's a neat effect, if you can see it on the table there, where when you put holographic paper behind these little cutouts and then they're suspended above other stuff, they give you that. Ooh, look at that. You know what I mean? So if I can get some of that to happen down here somewhere in our resin, it might be too shallow. It might not be the best way to make use of this piece, but it's a cool kind of thing to keep in mind for your mixed media arting. And so I had these little bits cast already. This was a set of buttons that I used for the space-saving bags and baskets that I made for my bathroom. Somewhere in this tutorial, you will see those bags. I crocheted them and then just added stuff to make it look like, you know, a little fishnet. And I've had these. I'll just give you a quick shot of what I was talking about with the space saver baskets that I made, because I think I may have mentioned I live in a very small space, second floor of my dad's house. And there is no space up here at all to work with, so I made these baskets to hang stuff. Keep a lot of it, you know, like up. And yeah, we're going to reuse all the, you know, that same sweater gave me the buttons that I used here, and I got that one left out there. I might even make a mold of it. But then I had all these. I did use up the little mermaid fish tails. I gave them to my aunt because she was making that neat backsplash for her fish cleaning station at her house up north. I'm getting ready to go outside and smoke. Oh my God, unorganized. But I still got some of these little pearls and bits of shell and stuff too. And I had these cool buttons because I had made a Kraken sweater a couple of years ago, and it didn't fit, and it was hideous, so I gave it to Goodwill. But I had extra buttons, you know what I mean? So all I did was just cut the, what do they call it, a bail? I cut the bail off the back, so it's flat, and I can use it in other projects. So that might get used. And while I was casting some of my other coasters and stuff, I decided to try for the first time the resin bloom technique. You can find lots of tutorials for that on YouTube, and I'd seen a bunch, but I didn't really, you know, I just didn't have a reason to try it. And I was at the same time trying to figure out if I could use my mineral-based paints in resin and what would be the effect of that. And I couldn't really find a good answer on the internet. I found stuff about mineral fusion resin, which is a specific product, and all kinds of other stuff. So I didn't know what was going to happen with either. So I decided to try it, and mixed results, because I think that bloom would have been absolutely beautiful if that mineral paint white had worked. However, when I got to looking at it, that effect is a bit like coral. Huh. What do you know? And if it's translucent like that, let's see if we can get a good shot. We may be able to make it look in specific areas as if there is slightly translucent seaweed or something neat. I might get some neat little pieces that I can cut out and use here if I try that experiment again in a different mold. And I decided to try it when I had extra resin from a different pour, and do it really thin in one of the molds just to see, you know what I mean, just to test the product and see what that stuff would do. And there we go. We got a decent focus on it. Excuse my slightly shaky camera, but that's cool. Look at that texture. And the transparency of the alcohol ink that you use to make those resin blooms. Yeah, man, I think we can work with that if I do it in colors that are in this scheme. So we want some warm golden yellows, and very, very subdued greens. And there's some areas where we're going to get to use some really dark blues, but we can make it a little bit more vivid. Because also, since I used the same image, just reversed and split, I have the same color scheme, but, you know, I'm thinking about this kind of stuff. This area is going to look a little bit bright or whatever, and this kind of technique coming through there might tone it down a little bit, and I'll get to try this again, but I'll do it really thin like this so that it's cuttable or breakable easily without having to worry about sanding, because when you go to sand this stuff, you do need to take safety precautions. You don't want to breathe it. And that's where we get to a little bit of a product review about stuff like this and building a studio to stay busy and just keep your mojo flowing. This particular resin is kind of great for little things like jewelry or whatever. But when I was going through one of my like homebody phases and just like, I'm not dealing with people, I ordered this one from the internet. I think I got it from Amazon. It was cheap, you know what I mean? And I wanted to try it rather than just run to the local craft store and get the one that they carry, which is this stuff. You can get it at Joanne, Michael, places like that. Anyway, I was highly disappointed with this product, and also very thrilled about it for other reasons. This stuff stays rubbery for days. Even when it's mixed properly and everything like that, it stays like that. And that's actually really cool for some applications. You know what I mean? That's actually a usable feature. But for other features, not so much. Like for those big heavy resin coasters that I make, I want to give them a sanding in, you know, 24 to 48 hours and pour another layer. And this stuff, that's going to be hard to do because it's not going to be stable enough to hold the molds stable. You know what I mean? While you get down there and just give it a little bit of sanding, it's going to move. It's going to pick up all kinds of problems. But for jewelry making, stuff like that, it's great. And for bendability, absolutely great. So I've ended up using it in stuff where I'm trying to make something kind of three-dimensional or purposely wrap around another piece. And we might get to play with some of those techniques. But I'm definitely going to try another resin bloom and try to purposely screw it up again and use just this same blue that I had. It's just alcohol ink. And I'm kind of on the fence. I have never seen the effect of this yellow in resin. I've never used it in resin. But I have this one that's kind of like a honey gold. It actually, it's pretty dark. So I might try a little bit of both just to see what happens. And one way or another, we'll probably end up with some cool usable pieces. And that's where we're going to talk about the resin molds just a little bit more. And maybe I'll edit some of this and put it in other places or at the end of the video. But during my Resin Masters of the Universe tutorial, I finally tore one of my molds. I mean, just it got torn and there was nothing I could do about it. It was the square. And I needed to replace it. I actually enjoy these ones. These are fun for a variety of reasons. You can make a border for anything with that cool channel. But look at the depth of these. When you're doing multi-layered things, you want depth to work with so that you get the effect properly. And I ordered a replacement from Amazon for that set because it was like a good price, you know. And let's see if I can prop this up. I should have thought about that beforehand. It was a good price though, and it had that neat geode shape. And there's lots of cool tutorials on how to make your own geode resin coasters or make a deal of it. But those are a much less deep project. Let me give you a sense of the difference in depth between these two molds and why you wouldn't want to try those multi-layered effects with these unless you really know what you're doing and how to like spread out a really nice thin layer. Then these molds from Amazon are going to be your buddy, and I'm going to get to do lots of cool stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with them. This is their standard square coaster though, and depth-wise, I wouldn't be able to achieve that Masters of the Universe effect in there with that galactic, like, whoo, that was some cool stuff, man. That turned out so cool. I love it. I wouldn't be able to do that with these unless I did 2 of them and pasted them together, which is a possibility. You know what I mean? I'm just giving you some ideas here. We're going to share some inspiration. Multi-purpose stuff. Also, in my, like, junk bins, how I keep stuff around, you know what I mean? So that I don't have to run out all the time, and I don't throw little stuff like this away if it's got an application somewhere in another project. And this, a lot of the paints like this I picked up when we moved into this house for furniture painting and stuff like that, and fixes. And I've gotten these little molds to fix some antique pieces of furniture that were missing trim. These are actually for like furniture and stuff. They're big, heavy molds. And we have a lot of like weird antique pieces in our family that we pass around. So, but I had tried to cast some plaster in them and stuff, and it didn't really work. It's just a bit too thin. If I'd have used hydrocal, I'd have got a nice hard piece that would have pulled out of that shallow mold nicely. But this was just regular old, you know, craft room plaster Paris. Didn't quite work for that. But I might be able to find a place to use some of those waveforms, you know, in one of our corners or something here. We might still get some use out of this craft bin junk from a failure. See, it's not a failure. It's just, you know, it's a Bob Ross happy accident. Because that's fairly, you know, it looks watery. And there's a couple other neat little pieces that were salvageable from that project. I wish these columns had been just a little wider, and I could maybe, I thought about it, but they don't really match. See, we've got something, I don't know, I'm trying to remember. Is that that's not a Doric column. See, my art history, out the window, screw it. So we're just going to make some, and I think I'm just going to use, like once I plaster it down, I'll seal it and get it up to this same level of prep with the rest of the frame. And then I'm going to try to build on top of it a little bit with maybe some drywall paste and let it sit for a couple days. I could build a little wall with some oil clay and put some plaster in there. You could use air dry clay. I checked mine because that was my first go-to. And I hadn't used it in so long that it's kind of hard. So if I can salvage any of it, maybe I'll just go ahead and use that up because it seems to be at the end of its shelf life. So I might use paper clay. You can use anything, just so long as it's sealed well enough that your resin isn't going to leak and it's not going to destroy any of your process, because, you know, it might do some weird stuff if it were to start to leak into that. So we're going to eliminate issues like that. But I have a good feeling about it. Oh, you hope with me, because that's some cool stuff. We've got some great inspiration pieces going. I'm going to cast another one of those little seahorses because I like this one. That was just from another experiment. The colors are nice. It could work in there really well. Someplace up here, then he'd look like, those colors work good. But I wanted to see what it looked like with a slightly different background before I paint one. And, you know, highlight it. And that's how I do these. I coat the mold in one of those darker pigments, and then on the top of it, so that we've got some way to distinguish all those tiny little details. For this one, for example, I actually used just a baby thin coat on the highlights, and I just kind of pressed it in place in some places of white gesso, and then I barely had to get just the tiniest amount of watered down cadmium yellow and I'm trying to remember what I used for the top there. I think it's vermilion, but I watered it down till it was just barely a hint. And I matched the color pretty well, so that might get used in there. But while I was playing, I figured I might as well cast one with a slightly darker background. And I never have used the orange that came in my original set of Pearl-Ex pigments. I've had that set for years and have never touched that pigment for anything. just didn't quite work into anything. I might have, but I can't remember. So I just want to try it. Oops, man, that camera view. And that fish mold, this was a good $2. Well spent, man. Because look at what a beautiful little fish it cast. I think I'm going to put yellow behind that. And it'll probably pop. And same with this one. I tried some more of that orange. And a slightly lighter blue from that Pearl-Ex pigment set. I never use it because I think it looks like cheap nail polish. That's just my opinion. Everything I've mixed it into, I don't like. I really don't like the results of it. It just reminds me of something. Maybe it's something like frosted eyeshadow. I don't know. I don't care for it. But I think for little fish, I might love it. And the same with this pink pigment that came in that set. Never used it. It looked like nail polish to me. And if I were making, little Barbie trinkets or something, yes. Oh, it's lovely. It'd be beautiful. But I'm not doing that. And I haven't done anything like that. But for these corals, I decided to try some more of that pink just to see how it would look. And, ooh, I'll be darned. If, I'll clean up the edges a little bit with a little X-Acto knife. But it's maybe a little bit too bright. But I'm thinking if it's in there, I don't know, that might be too pink. But it's going to work in one of my projects because gorgeous. And it's the kind of thing where I might be able to tone it down just a teeny tiny bit by adding some white on top. I am going to do that for these little shells. I think those ones will work in this project really well. They're all from that same mold. Just tinier ones than anything I have on hand. And, for failed experiments that might work somewhere else, that little mold does not look good cast in green. I thought it might because the other seaweed that's in this mold looks great cast in green. It's really pretty. But this one looks like broccoli. That we don't need any, I don't think we need broccoli under the sea. But I have those, sitting around too from another failed attempt at something that might not be so failed because who knows what I might do. I might need broccoli under the sea. I got some leftover bits of real turquoise. I used turquoise in a couple of projects, like real bits. I can replicate the effect, but I wanted some real ones to add some, some actual natural flow to a project. I have a lot of stuff like that. I've got shungite in the borders of some of my resin coasters. I just decided to employ it that way recently, but I thought it might be kind of nice. Shungite's kind of cool. And I've used real quartz and stuff like that, obviously. I've used stones out of the garden in some of these projects. So we're going to crack along. Okay, we're back to the original inspiration piece. And what I'm doing right now is I'm beginning to add some of these little chips of pearlescent. It's abalone shell. I don't think it's real. You just get it in packs from craft stores and stuff like that. But it doesn't matter. It matches this image really well. And as we try to add dimension before we begin dumping any kind of resin into this piece, I'm going to make some of that dimensional. What I did is I mixed some more of this. Is this that? That's not the color that I used. Here's the color that I used for this. This is from my same basic set of Pearl-Ex pigments. They really will last you forever if you get a set of these. This is shade 665. Let's see if we can read that. Oro Ocaso? I don't even know what that means. But you can mix these pigments into darn near anything. So I mixed it with some clear glue. And that's how I'm going to start to build dimension there. I'm just placing these little bits of shell down, and then let me grab my tool here, and then kind of pushing them into that gold paint. And we're going to end up with so much stuff in here that, I think some of the little inconsistencies and stuff like that are just going to go away. And we can go in here. This particular glue is actually a really, really cheap craft glue. And what I like about it, besides the fact that it's cheap, is it stays open for a really long time, and it's kind of liquidy, so you can work with it. And it's this stuff. I don't remember what store they sell it at, but it's like the super cheapest bulk clear paints for kids crafts, you know what I mean? But I got some because it was super clear. I was making slime with one of my nieces a couple years ago, and you know, that kind of slime that you make with borax and food coloring for kids. And it ended up being super useful stuff. So, you know, I keep it in my craft repertoire, whatever you call it. And let's just drop another stone in there so you can see how that process goes. This will just be a quick clip, but wow, isn't that a pretty one? You know, so as that glue settles in, hopefully it will get a look very similar to this stone walkway with mortar. I might have to arrange those a little bit more, get them a little closer together. Maybe I'll put some touches of pearlescent paint in between in little spots to fill in gaps, because see, mine is way gappier than theirs, or this original AI image that I've got working with here. But there we go. That's a bit of that process. Let's keep moving. Project number 1 is here. I've got my picture. This one is laminated, but I cut really close to the edges and just used glue to seal the edges as I glued it down. And then I started gluing down some of those little stones. And these are dollar store vase filler broken glass, but you don't have to buy that. If you have, you know, colored glass around your house, this was like a purple decorative bottle. I broke it, so instead of chucking it in the trash, I broke it even more and put it in a jar, and I use it. I used it on my purple and green and gold resin geode, and it worked great. It looks like amethyst. But these ones are just dollar store vase filler gems, and then see, I stuck one of my little resin crabs down in there, and some shells and stuff. And I'm gonna try out that green sea broccoli. We're gonna see what it does. But this one's ready for the first layer of resin, and the reason that these sides are open, no image, and I didn't build anything here, is because I'm going to drop a very dark resin in there and try to get it to fan out a little bit. If it doesn't quite work, we'll just glue more stuff in there to hide that edge of that picture. And that's, I think, gonna work really well. We'll find out soon. This one, we've got our side columns all built, and I think they look pretty decent. And I've already got a couple of coats of gesso and a coat of the plain cotton white. And these were some of those little plaster bits I was talking about earlier. I found a couple that work, and I'm going to end up using them right there. So same thing, I cleaned up the edges of the bits that were salvageable and look good for this project, and I've started giving them a couple of good coats, really good coats, and lots of drying time in between. And we're just about ready to start painting this frame now that we've got some more direction. But I'm liking the direction so much, I might drill some more holes in front for pegs. Or maybe I'll do them up here. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll do them both. In case I want to hang this on the wall and hang things off of it, because it's going to turn out pretty cool. Okay. Mentioned previously these experimental blooms made with alcohol ink and mineral paint instead of acrylic or ink. And this is that same one that stays bendable for a couple of days after it's poured. And I've decided just to use up that package and be done with that stuff, because I'll probably move on from resin crafts for a while after this one. But these are still cuttable. This is like I think it's been about 48 hours since I poured these ones, but it's starting to harden up and get solid. So now it's the time to finish my layout and figure out where I'm going to use them, so that if I need to make any more cuts, I can do it while it's still cuttable with scissors. Because once they're good and hard, these do harden up. That one does harden up just like the other resins do. Then you'll need tools like a little saw or something to cut it, and I don't feel like dealing with that for this little studio project. So I'm going to cut them now, and they're going to work in there, I think. But I'll probably, since I've got so much stuff now filling in the spaces and so many little bits planned, I'll probably end up with just a little small section peeking out up here, you know, maybe that much. I'll just cut right around the edge and put a little bit of plant life up there, and then maybe take it and flip it and put a little bit down here. Wouldn't that look pretty? I think so. Yes. And that'll go into my first pour. We're going to start painting this frame and get it up to the level of our other experiment. Okay, so the way I prepared the frame on the other piece that we've been working through, I did several very thin washes, some with acrylic washes like this. This one, what is the shade? Let me see here. Mahogany, okay, and like, I don't know where when I picked this one up, but it's supposed to be a wash, and it really is, but we want it even thinner, so I'm gonna add probably 2 droppers full of water, and I always have these around. You get them with little kits of different types of paints and things like that, and they're super useful. So I'm going to mix it around a little bit just so it's super, super thin for this first wash. And I also have one of these handy dandy small atomizers. The spray thing on these actually works really well. They get you get them in the stamping department. Same thing, they'll come with some of your basic kits, and they really are nice. I have just regular distilled water in mine, ready to spread this wash around a little bit, because I want it nice and thin. Because see, even that is dark for what I'm doing and how I'm trying to build gradual kind of color. So I've got paper down and things, obviously, to protect my work surface a little bit, but I've got some on there. And I've watched people do wash techniques a lot of different ways, but I kind of like this one. Just kind of get in there and spray it and let it move around a little bit. You know, tip it, move it. And that's what I did for my other one. And I'm just going to keep working sections of it. I also have a little dish tub down by my feet. So if it starts getting, you know, really wet and there's just a lot of moisture here, we can dump some of that off into that little dish tub that I use here in my studio for stuff like that. Or if I'm sanding just tiny pieces, when I'm being a good girl, I'll do it over the little tub, you know, so I have less cleanup. I'm not always that organized, but if I'm doing a good and proper job, you know. And that, see, my brush was wet, so that portion came on even thinner. But I like that. I like how it's already picking up texture. And my sides on this one, I don't know. Yeah, I should moisten them so some of that wash goes down. But my ultimate plan for this one is to, see, there's a little B marking which side I think is the back. I want to put a border around this, some kind of little, like, you know, a pretty trim, nautical, something cute. I've been playing around with some of my scrap yarns and stuff like that, and experimenting with some different pretty decorative braids and stuff like that, see what they might look like for something like a rope edge, and going through my scraps of trim and stuff. Something will come up before the end of the project. I'll know what I want to use there, and I'm going to try to definitely use or build something out of what I have. I don't want to make any more trips to the craft store for this one, because this has actually been, at this point, almost a week in progress between sanding and finishing and just preparing my frame because I made it of scrap wood. If you know, have a better studio setup or some kind of semi-prepared frame, you know, maybe it'll go a little bit more quickly for you, but for me, no. So that is wash 1, pretty much. I'm going to go through and touch up, and I got to do this one little corner. But we're going to do washes in different colors, just like this. Maybe we'll learn how to do the speed effect and do a montage. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, our other washes that we're using, and this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of breaking the rules, but not really. I made this wash with a watercolor. And watercolor, you know, yeah, it's supposed to wash off. It is watercolor. But the pigment is the pigment, and you can add it to other things. So in this case, I like this shade of turquoise. It can look either like the stone turquoise itself, or it can be used to create kind of rust effects, which is what I used on the little anchor in the other little trinket tray diorama that we're making. Same color. But what I did to make it stay permanent is I just mixed it with acrylic matte medium. A lot of you, if you do painting of any sort, you have either a matte or a gloss medium, something that extends the open time of your paint. But it is also like a very thin paint itself. And I've done the same thing. I've mixed small amounts of colors with these, like, just the cheap, you know, $1 matte varnish. And all of a sudden that's going to stay. So my next wash is made from matte varnish. It does make it look milky, but when it dries, it won't be that milky. It'll have an effect kind of like this. Watercolor, and then we're going to do another one. I may or may not show any of that out of this color, because for this piece, whereas the other one has a very dark frame, I want to brighten this one up and use some lighter tones in it, because I think the image has some lighter tones, and I think it'll look nice in the end result. So for this one, since I haven't mixed in this little thing here, it does settle. Like if it sits for a while, all that pigment will settle out of the varnish, so you got to stir it back up, you know, but you can mix up a little bit of this at a time. I did add a little bit of water to it just to thin it out even more and make it really watery. You know what I mean? So I'm going to get some of that going and use my larger brush to kind of spread it out. I don't know. Oh, that brush will kind of fit in there. There we go. We'll just do it like that. Very wet. And let it, just let it, you know what I mean? Let it do its thing. And it'll start to work in those little, all that crazy texture and stuff that we were building up by being nice and sloppy and enjoying the feel of the material, the actual, like, enjoy the tactile experience from my point of view. That's part of what's fun about this. See how now it's starting to look cool, and it's going to stick because we mixed it with that, with an acrylic binder, you know what I mean? Just anything to bind it. I've experimented a little bit with adding some of these different pigments and stuff to, like, glue, stuff like that, just to see what they do, you know what I mean? It's not going to hurt anything with stuff like this. Worst case scenario for this one, you know, I ruined a bunch of stuff out of the garage that was just scrap anyway, and it might have used up a lot of time, but also that I entertained myself for a whole week now. I mean, I've gone out and done other stuff. I got my classes. I went to a stress relieving thing today. That was really nice. But yeah, like so much entertainment. And I like this coating like this. That looks pretty good. We'll see what it dries like. This one I might get some second coats of that blue. And after I add just a little bit of this, this yellowy tone, we're going to use raw sienna for our next wash, to get some greens and stuff to come out. We'll see where it's at. Home stretch on this. Okay, I've not laid any of my resin layers yet, and I've been kind of taking my sweet time about this one because not only have it been waiting for layers of paint to dry, but we haven't had any good sunlight here, and my schedule's been all over the place, and I've been kind of waiting for some sunlight to show you what our next surface treatment process looks like. I did a little bit of it when I had, you know, maybe 15 minutes of sunlight yesterday. And if you can see that, we're really starting to build texture. I laid in a little bit of my gold wax on top of all those washes. Off camera, I did one of my raw sienna that I showed earlier. And I wanted a little bit more green for this one, and it was still too light, so I added a little bit more blue. And then I started adding in some of this fun gold wax, and I'm going to show you how easy that is to use. And then once I've got a good coat on it, I'll check it out and I'll see if I want to add another treatment to the surface before I lay my resin in, because it turns out this one's going to end up being fairly easy. Other than the image itself and some layers and little bubbles and things to add depth, I'm not going to do a lot of crazy treatments because really the highlight of this project is the cool frame, the image itself, and then I did cut all of my cool little pieces here. Hopefully this is not too hard upside down. I think parts of this video will be upside down. That's okay. So anyway, this wax, this is the Dixie Belle gold gilding wax, and I got products like these when we were redoing the house to fix some of the furniture, but it turns out you can use them on anything, just like the mineral paints that we got for some of the furniture. I have ended up using them in my crafts and stuff like that because they're self-leveling and they give you a really, really beautiful solid coverage. Same thing with this wax. Check this stuff out. You can apply it with a brush or with your finger, and you know, sometimes I like here I'm going to put it just in where I want it, and then with a cloth, a sponge, really anything you want, you can kind of brush over it and it'll move around a little bit. See how it immediately started picking up all of those cool little cracks, and now we've got all that neat color behind it too. So that's just, I mean, and I just barely, I use an old scrubby brush with shorter bristles. Can you even see that? Yeah. And just kind of dab a little bit off, because a little bit goes a long way, a really long way. You'll be surprised. And then just barely touch it, and wow, look at that stuff, man. It's just amazing. And see here, I can dab a little bit right there or whatever, sloppy, just get it on, and then run my finger across it, and all of a sudden it picks up the little cracks in between and all that stuff, and now we're creating something like an antique depth. The other cool thing about this is if you don't really like what it looks like there, you can use clear wax, clear like a smooth finishing wax like that, and rub it over the top and wipe it away while it's still malleable, and it'll come off. But once it's on there, it'll stay pretty good. Anything with a solvent, if you go to clean it, will take that off. But furniture that we have that's, you know, old waxed furniture and stuff, we don't use solvents on it. We wipe it with a clean, dry cloth or a damp cloth, and that's enough. But yeah, if you get sick of it, you can use a solvent or something and take it off. You can use the clear wax, and it'll adhere to just the other waxes, and it'll pull them off, you know, if you want to get rid of it and try something new. I've had so much fun with these products, and I've used them with an amazing range of things. I've used them, you know, on like paper arts and stuff like that. They still work. I've gotten so much mileage out of these, and you know, besides the little bit of work we had to do around here, like just touching up trim on cabinetry and stuff like that where it was gold, stuff like that, a little bit of this rather than a whole new paint job, and stuff looked great, you know. And then on painted items you can just add all kinds of little details. Super easy. And see, now we're really starting to get somewhere with depth and dimension in this. This one is lighter than our other project, you'll notice. So I'll mention here that I did definitely want to keep the color palette of this one a bit brighter and add in more of those pretty greens and stuff like that. But on the other one, I wanted a much darker frame. So I used one of those thin washes, like I mentioned before, that you can make with any kind of acrylic binder, and you can use any kind of pigment you want. For that one, I used Black Diamond Copper Penny pigment, and it added an overall much darker background. And all I did, I treated it just like the other pigments. I put just a little bit of it, I mean a teeny tiny dip of it, into a little bit of that mixture and then washed it over, and it stuck, and it gave me a very shiny background. And then I laid my copper wax and gold wax on the top of that. Project 1, our original piece, I've laid in a nice thick deep layer of resin, and I inserted those interesting plant forms that we created with our little experiment. It's so hard to get a good image without glare. I'll probably have a better one by the end of the tutorial, but it worked, and it worked pretty well. The only issue I have with it is if you look very closely, you can very faintly see the outline where I cut the resin insert. And I did it because I didn't want to disturb the colored edges. I wanted it to be translucent there. I like that effect. You can kind of see an edge. I thought it might just disappear in the clear resin, and it mostly did. You can barely see it. So it worked out on this one because I just lined that whole clear edge with bubbles once I saw that it was going to be visible and the resin was still wet. So it worked for this one, but before I go into this other piece, I'm going to try to find a way to work around that and make it less obvious so I don't have to fill the entire space with bubbles. We'll see what I come up with. But otherwise, the resin pouring on this one is done. And I'm really happy with the effect. Even with having that little bit of a line there, the bubbles did obscure it a lot, but allowed that weird little bloom experiment we did with the mineral paint to work out really nicely. And it was getting a little busy. I had originally planned to put all kinds of funky stuff on the frame of this one as well, but it got busy in here, and I like that. I think that's good. We're going to leave it alone and just set it aside until time to add handles and finishing on the back so that it's nice. I'm getting ready to do my final pour on this one. All my plant forms are in place. The first layer of resin, and then I added some little bubbles in, and you can already see how much dimension is in there. Now I've glued in place my side pieces, and just to kind of like help make the transition, I mixed some regular old sand into my favorite cheap craft glue, and then I added just a tiny amount of this is like the potpourri glitter cleanups from the Resin Masters of the Universe project, and I figured it would just add a little bit of extra sparkle and a little bit of color into that sand as well to help transition between the image and the shiny frame. And I'm just laying it in with a little tiny palette knife here, you know what I mean? And just kind of getting up in there and making sure, you know, like there's a little bit behind the crack there. So it'll be pretty from all angles. You know, and it helps reinforce that lip edge a little bit, make sure that everything's ready. So this is the last pour. I might show a little bit of that because in a few spots here, you can barely tell because I really just used clear, and then when I had just a teeny bit of resin left, right here, you can see some of the swirls of a very translucent blue, just to give it that impression of some movement of currents. Oh, look, yuck, dirty nails from studio work. I earned that. And I think it worked really well. You can really see it up towards the top where it's over the white dappled light coming through. And I'm going to do some more of that when I lay this final layer. Just very thin, squiggly swooshes running through there. Just a little bit of highly translucent tinted resin, and I'm using this again. I used it in the Masters of the Universe tutorial, the Opal Magic, Finnabair. Oh, this stuff is so cool. I'll show some of what that does. I think at the end of the video, we're going to do a clip about some of these products. So this is the final result of my projects with resin and those wonderful Finnabair Art Alchemy products. This, I mean, it is a tray, but I did the handles so that it could also be hung in the back, just to save space, because as I've said before, I live in a really, really small space. So I have to be mindful of what I'm doing and how I'm using things. And this is the final result of the one that we made together. I'm just using it on the back of the potty for a little trinket tray like most people do, just to set some of my extra soaps and little things on. And I think it turned out really nice. That was a fun experiment, a fun project. I was gonna keep holding on to this one until I had some kind of really fun intro or outro, and it's been over a month, well, 2 months now that this silly little tutorial has been in the works. But let's get a good little look at how that all worked out. That's how the sand worked out. I think it turned out really cool. And I've got duplicates of these images, so I might make some other little projects, more little space-saving things. I do stuff like this. This is one of the ones I really like. It's just a, you know, like a cookie tin or a chocolate tin, sorry, the stuff you get for Christmas, but I screwed it to the wall and I filled it with magnets to hold all my little bobby pins and necklaces and things like that. That's all. Thanks for watching. Be inspired. Do fun stuff. See, this is fun. My big pictures match the little ones in the fairy trinket tray bathroom